Hello everyone and welcome to episode 29, our penultimate episode of the 4LadsHadADream podcast. My name's Stevie Clifford and as usual joining us is our co-host. He is the Chief Rangers writer at the Glasgow Times and Herald Group, Mr. Chris Jack. Chris, good morning, how are you?
Morning Stevie, how are we? Been an interesting couple of weeks since the last podcast, plenty happening on and off the park, and I'm really looking forward to this one. Should certainly be a really interesting and enlightening one. I'm sure one that Rangers fans are going to be really delighted and intrigued to hear from our two guests this morning.
Yeah, without doubt, it's one of the biggest podcasts we've done. Joining us this morning will be Fawkes from Club 1872 and also ex-chairman and currently shareholder, Mr. Dave King. The reason they join us is to discuss last week's announcement about the Never Again campaign, and we'll be asking them some critical questions that you have all asked that we try and find the answers to on social media. What myself and Chris have done is collated what we think is the best questions and the most prominent questions to ask to both Dave and to Laura as we try and find out the answers. I think what's important to state at this moment is as well that myself and Chris, we're just asking the questions. We'll present you the answers and we hope people understand that we've done our best to try and do that. Obviously, it's a very emotive subject. It's not our usual podcast where we'll be sitting down with an ex-pro and asking them their favourite goal. So this is a bit of a challenge for us also. So we hope you all enjoy it. Okay, so please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Dave King. Dave, hello, how are you?
Yeah, very good yourself. Thanks for having me. Now, I look forward to our chat.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Also joining us as well is Laura Fawkes from Club 1872. Laura, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Stevie. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. As I said, thank you both for giving us the opportunity to speak to you. Obviously, it's a very exciting project. And I suppose the first thing, Laura, if we can ask you, the announcement of the Never Again campaign, can you maybe explain to us exactly what it is and exactly what the announcement means for everyone?
Yeah, sure. So we're calling it a legacy campaign, and one of the lines that Dave, one of the phrases that Dave coined in relation to it is "never again," and what those two things mean at a very high level. Never again is symbolic. It means that we don't want to go back and see a repeat of where we've been over the last few years as a club, and more importantly as a support. We don't want the club to fall into the wrong hands. We want to put that protection in place. We are mindful, we remember where we've been, and we don't ever want to see our children and our grandchildren experiencing what we did as Rangers fans, and that's where the legacy part of it comes in. So what we're asking people to do is make a £500 donation to Club 1872, and that can be made up front in one go, or it can be made over a period of time. There are various options laid out on the website. And in total, people will have donated the £500. They become a legacy member. And in practice, what that allows us to do is to purchase Dave King's entire shareholding and become the single largest shareholder in Rangers. And it's through that shareholding that we get the protection that I just mentioned there. I was thinking about this podcast last night. I was sort of thinking about, what might come up, and obviously knew that we would have to explain a bit about what the legacy campaign was. And I was remembering the day after the last game, prior to going into, or just around the time we were going into administration. And I remember the next day going to, a cousin of mine had a birthday party for his wee boy, his first birthday party. And I remember going there and talking, just sort of chit chat and saying, were you at the game yesterday? How did you find it? How are you feeling about things? And I remember us saying to each other, this could be it. Those are really scary times for Rangers fans, and we were uneasy, and and I remember that, and I think we all need to remember that. We've talked to supporters about this before and asked, if you had a time machine and you could go back in time prior to the club being sold to Craig White and everything that happened thereafter, and you could have put £10 a month into a vehicle that you knew would give you the protection that Club 1872 can give you, would you have done it? And I think for most of us, the answer is yes. And at this moment in time, we have a great board in place. We have trust in the board, and the club's going in a great direction. But there are no guarantees. And what this shareholding would bring us is a degree of control and influence over the club, so that we can prevent the events of 2012 ever happening again.
Dave, can I just ask you a wee bit about this as well? Can you explain to us what the Never Again campaign means for you? And why have you chosen to sell your shares now, and why to Club 1872?
I think that Laura explained my position very well on why I'm actually speaking to 1872 at this point in time. But in terms of Never Again, I think I've got an insight that other supporters don't have as to how this whole sordid saga started. And it started at the time that I was on the board, when David Murray was the owner. And at that time, I was less than a 25% shareholder. I was the second largest shareholder, but I was substantially below 25%. So effectively, David Murray was running the company as he saw fit. And even some of the information coming before the board was inadequate in terms of understanding what David Murray was doing with the company. And there's a single event happened at that point in time, which is that David Murray, having the full confidence of supporters, having a very, very successful team in the pitch, and everything looking as if it was going really, really well, borrowed money and gave up the club shares as security. Now, if I had known that, or supporters had known that at the time, then that would never have happened. And I had discussions with David Murray at the time about the funding, because I was putting in money, David was putting in money. And my understanding was always that the money we were putting in was our own money. And I was not aware of the fact that David Murray was lending money that was not his and using the club's shares as security. And everything that happened arose from that one single event, because if David Murray hadn't given the club shares as security, the bank would never have intervened at a later stage. And as much as, Alistair Johnson, who was chairman at the time, kind of very manfully defended the club as best as he could against the bank, ultimately the single event that caused everything that happened thereafter was David Murray using the club shares as security for debt, and the board not being aware of that. And my stake was so insignificant that I wasn't able to really find out what was going on, and I couldn't have influenced it even if I was aware. And that's why I think it's absolutely important for the supporters going forward, when times are good now, to in fact try and acquire a level of influence that allows a seat at the table, because the supporters have gone through very, very difficult times. Whatever has been achieved over the last couple of years could not have been achieved without the supporters. They've given everything. They've given money they've got. They've even given money they don't have. And I think, to use the term never again, I think this is the opportunity for supporters to get a seat at the table, to get an influential stake in the club, and to make sure that the supporters are properly considered in all aspects that might put the club at risk going forward. And as Laura says, at the moment we've got a board that we trust. They've been part of the recovery of the club. Therefore, it's fine at the moment, but where will we be in 5 years, 10 years' time? And I think that's what we're doing now, as we're saying, for all supporters going forward, to make sure this never happens again. This is a one-off opportunity to acquire a meaningful and influential stake, both in terms of relationships, but legally. The rights that these supporters have legally as a major shareholder would be very, very significant.
Dave, just to further ask you just a wee bit on that, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you said last year when you stepped down as chairman, you wouldn't be selling your shares, but you now have decided to. Can you explain a wee bit to the support about why you've decided to do that now?
Well, it's more really an extension of deciding not to sell them. I was asked a question when I did step down, does that mean I would sell my shares? And I said, no, I've got no intention of doing that. And over the last kind of 8 months, in reflecting on that, I was thinking, well, I'm not going to sell the shares, but what would happen if I wasn't around? How would my family feel? Because they would be in control of that situation, not me. And I've got a South African family that they don't have my kind of Scottish Glasgow upbringing. So they certainly wouldn't have my commitment to the shareholding that I have. So I thought in advance of that what I could do is kind of re-engage Club 1872, because we had a discussion a couple of years ago. Club 1872 had said to me, look, we know this is a project for you. What will happen at the end? Would you ever consider making the shares available to Club 1872 on some basis? So we had a very initial discussion, but at that time I was very much mired in, saving the club. So it wasn't something I was reflecting on as I've been able to do over the last couple of months. So really, it's about me saying, where is the right home for my shareholding going forward? Where is a safe pair of hands? And I feel it has to be with supporters. And my personal dealings with Club 1872 over the years gives me confidence that Club 1872 is the right vehicle to be a custodian for my shares going forward.
Laura and Dave, this is one of the things that has come up quite a lot. What happens if Club 1872 fail to raise the required money to buy your shares? And then what happens at that point to the fans' money that has been raised?
Yeah. I think it's important to clarify, and we have put this information out publicly. It's on the website, and we've been sharing this information on social media and whatnot. But just for the benefit of anyone who's missed this, and I think it's important that we clarify this. We will be buying the shares in tranches. That's part of the agreement that we've put in place. We're not going to be in a position where we're stockpiling all this money, fail to meet the required target, and then find ourselves with millions of pounds in the bank and not knowing what to do with it. Well, we will be buying Dave's shares as the 3-year period progresses. We can buy as many shares as the campaign is successful. The more people who sign up, the more shares we can buy over the time period.
What about you, Dave? Have you got a contingency? For example, if Club 1872 don't raise enough money, or it's not as popular as we all hope, would you? I remember you said in another interview you'd maybe add a year and things like that. Do you have a specific kind of plan in your mind that will allow for that?
Yeah, look, my attitude at the moment is, as long as Club 1872 is making progress and the supporters, really want to be, a significant owner in the club, then I would extend the period. So it's really more important for me, from a legacy point of view, that I can try and deliver that sharing to supporters, and I will accommodate Club 1872 and be very, very flexible, depending on the success of their campaign.
Can I just come back in there, Stevie? I think it's also important to remind people that the core purpose of Club 1872 Shares Company is to purchase shares in Rangers Football Club. So there may be a period where it looks like we've not met the target, and we might have some funds accumulated at that point. The purpose will always be to buy shares. It's great that Dave is going to be flexible with us on the time period, although we are really pushing for people to do this as quickly as possible so that we can take advantage of the agreement that we've put in place, whereby if we can, for example, buy all the shares in the first year, we will get them at a reduced rate. But Club 1872's core function to buy shares in Rangers Football Club will exist beyond the period of this deal. That will always be the priority for the shares company.
Laura, on that, there's only a couple of more questions. One I think you've already answered would be a question that people have asked: would we retain the shares if we didn't meet, for example, 13 million? But as you've already said, if we're buying in tranches, and using your expression there, that would mean that we would be accumulating shares as we go along. So you've answered that one. But what I would ask to you is, if the fans don't raise enough money that we had hoped, do you have a contingency plan?
The contingency plan is just, as I said, to carry on with the organisation's core function. We would seek to purchase shares on an ongoing basis. We would have to renegotiate with Dave at that point. We would have to speak to Dave about what timescales he would be looking at in terms of his flexibility. Beyond that, we would do what we've done previously. We spent £1 million on Mike Ashley's shares. I think that was in 2017. So there are opportunities to buy shares out with share issues have been few and far between, but where they've come up, we have certainly taken them, and that was an important purchase for us because it obviously helped rid the club of a very toxic influence. Over a period of, I think, 14 months, we took part in share issues and invested £1.5 million into Rangers. So that's something that Club 1872 has been doing before we even had these conversations, like Dave mentioned, the initial conversations that we had, because that's the core function of the organisation. And if we reach a point, and I think that's going to be a point in the future where we'll have to see where we are and take stock and have further discussions with Dave. But if we reach a point where that opportunity to buy Dave's shareholding no longer exists for us, we will go back to doing what we've always done, which is look for other opportunities to buy shares. It's the core function of the organisation. And therefore, it's always going to be our priority as a board.
I think a nice way of looking at it would be that the starting point is that one can look at myself and Club 1872 as being a combined supporter group. And at the moment, I've got the largest influence in terms of number of shares. And as this campaign progresses, then slowly that will move over to Club 1872. And ideally, at the end of the 3 years, it'll be all Club 1872 and none me. But if it turns out that it ends up being half-half or 2/3, 1/3, that's fine. You know, I still see it as being a combined group of supporters, with the level of influence changing in favour of Club 1872 the more they buy off me.
Dave, can I also just ask you something that people are asking as well? Would you consider, if this doesn't work out, and I know this is, I don't mean to bore you both with a negative theme, but a lot of the questions are hypothetical if this doesn't work, and it's what the supporters are kind of trying to figure out. But one thing they have asked Dave is, if this doesn't work with Club 1872, would you sell to anyone else, or is it your priority to get them to the fans? Would you consider going out with the fans or elsewhere?
No, you know, my consideration of the issue, as I said earlier, was how can I take my shareholding and ensure that, you know, let's say if I wasn't around, it would end up in safe hands. And I think the safe hands should be supporters. To my view, Club 1872 is the right supporter group. They've got good representation. I think they're already probably the 6th largest shareholder. So I really see that as being right for the club going forward. I think it's right for the supporters to have a responsible group like Club 1872 representing them. And certainly in my experience of dealing with Club 1872, it would be a strong preference for me for Club 1872 to be successful. And I repeat, if for whatever reason we couldn't do this deal at the end of the 3 years, I would keep it open for Club 1872 as long as they were making meaningful progress. I really believe that this is the right thing for the club.
Stevie, just on the point of, you know, what happens if this doesn't work, and there will be people who are naturally sceptical about this, given where we've been as a club and as a support. It is totally doable. I think as football fans, and I'm not just speaking about Rangers fans, I'm talking about, you know, across the UK. I think we have this sort of mindset, a collective mindset, that there will be this sugar daddy out there who'll come along and fund our club. When I'm talking to people about Club 1872 and how it works, I always say to them, do you have, in this case it would be, do you have £13 million to buy out Dave King's shareholding? And the answer that with most people, everyone that I know, would be no, of course I don't. But if you ask them, okay, do you have £10 a month that you could spare to put towards this over a period of 3 years? The answer for most people is yes. And look, we are understanding of the situation that many people find themselves in. We're in the middle of a pandemic, people's jobs have been affected, and we know that people give so much already to the club. But what we're asking people is, can you afford a little bit more? And if you can afford that £10 a month, if your answer is yes, and thousands, tens of thousands of other Rangers supporters' answer is yes, then collectively it's absolutely doable that we can raise the funds required to buy Dave's shareholding. And we're confident about this. The Rangers support have stepped up in dark times. Things are going well just now, and the Rangers support are right behind the club, are right behind the team. We came out in our numbers again and bought season tickets. This is totally doable, and it is a scale thing. This only works if more people get involved. And what you often hear from people what I often hear from people I speak to, and I see this on social media as well, is people saying, I'm going to sit back and see how they do. I'm going to sit back and see if this becomes successful, and then I'll join. Well, that's really a fundamental misunderstanding of the way Club 1872 works, because it can only work if tens of thousands of Rangers fans get behind it. We have a core group of about 7,000 members who have been with Club 1872 either since it started or with previous fans groups, and they have stepped up in recent years. As I said, we put £1.5 million into the club over a period of about 14 months. Those are small shoulders, like carrying a huge responsibility, and what we want to do is say, like, come and join us, you know, add your shoulders into the mix, take a collective responsibility for this. This is not just what can Club 1872 achieve, this is what can we as a support achieve, because Club 1872 is a member-led organisation. Members take all the key decisions in Club 1872. There are no directors of Club 1872 that have any more power than anybody else that's a member of Club 1872. And I think the important thing to stress is we're all as responsible as each other for Club 1872 working or not. So that's what I would say to people. We believe this can work. It's absolutely doable. And what we're asking of you is to donate £500, but you can do it over a period time. It's to take collective responsibility for this.
Dave, disappointingly, there has been a lot of discussion and chat on Rangers social media, fan zone and things regarding a fallout with yourself and the Rangers boardroom. Can you address them rumours for us?
And I certainly haven't heard any rumours in that regard, but certainly there's been no fallout between myself and the board. I stepped down at the end of March, which was consistent with the statement that I made at the AGM, to step down once we'd got the funding secured, so that the legacy of the financial deficit that I'd been party to incurring was properly squared away. And at the time when I stepped down, I can say that Douglas did ask me at the end of March if I would consider extending my stay on the board to see the club through the COVID crisis. And I said, Douglas, look, I just can't do that. So the intention from the board point of view was to keep me on the board a little bit longer, but I felt for two reasons. One is that the COVID crisis was a new crisis that was probably best dealt with by those on the ground in Scotland. The restrictions on travelling and the other bits and pieces, but really was an issue that the people in Scotland should deal with. Plus also, from my own perspective, I had some very, very challenging times and continue to do for my businesses in South Africa. So I was not able to agree to the request of the board to extend beyond March. But that was something I think that, trying to understand what I think the board were looking at. They were saying, it's another crisis, Dave, could you come and help us out with this? I just couldn't do it. But I don't think there was any falling out on that. It was just a request from the board that I was just unable to comply with.
To push you a wee bit further on that, and I know this may be tedious for you, but it is what is being discussed. Is there any issues with you and the Rangers board at the moment? Not
at all. Absolutely not. I mean, the board members, it's the same board that I chaired. It's the same individuals who were, part of the recovery process. As I see it, they've continued with that process. And certainly, for my part, I'm delighted with the way the board has continued. I think the board continues to be a safe pair of hands for the club right now. But as Laura said, that this is something for the future. We thought we had a safe pair of hands when David Murray was in charge, and it didn't turn out that way. So we've just got to make sure that the supporters have a level of influence that's independent of the board at any given time.
And finally, on this point, one of the big questions and suggestions: did you discuss your plans with the Rangers board?
No. This is a shareholder issue, and the same as, from the time that I left the board, I've just been another shareholder. I've not had access to any information from any of the directors regarding the affairs of the club. I'm just another shareholder. And this was a confidential discussion between myself and Club 1872. It was very, very tightly managed in terms of confidentiality, because one knows with all things Rangers, these things can leak and develop a life of their own. And we maintain very, very strict confidentiality between ourselves up until the time that we reached agreement and we were going to make the announcement. And then I just gave in advance of that, I let the board know as a courtesy that that's what I was agreed, and I was going to make an announcement. But there was no discussions with the board whatsoever, and there was no reason to discuss it with the board. It's a shareholder issue, it's not a board issue.
So just before we move on as well, you're happy with the current board, you're happy with your relationship with the Parks, and there is no issues. I appreciate I'm asking again, Dave, but this has been at the forefront of social media within Rangers fans. A lot of people suggesting that there is issues. So just to bottom this out completely, there is no problem with the Rangers board, no problem with Douglas Park or any board members from yourself.
Well, no, not only is there not a problem. I mean, I would be very surprised if the Rangers board wasn't delighted with this development, because I guess they would have some concern as to what was going to happen with my shares at some time in the future if I wasn't around. So I would think what this has done is it's taken away a lot of uncertainty, and at least the board can now look forward and say, well, at least we now know where Dave King's shares are going to end up. They're going to end up with supporters. And, this board certainly is very alert to the fact that supporters have been key to getting the club back to where it is at the moment. And I think this board is very alert to the need to retain close relationship with supporters and avoid the disconnect we saw from the Ashley Easdale area. So I would be very surprised if any of the board members were not happy and didn't welcome this initiative from me.
Dave, thank you. I appreciate that. It's kind of an awkward thing to have to ask, but it is something that has been at the forefront of supporters' kind of discussions in the last week. Moving on, Laura, Dave, this is, I'll try and please appreciate I'm only a normal fan and I don't really understand a lot of these things, so I'll try and ask this as best I can. But can you address what happens if there's another share issue and Dave's share are then diluted? Would you join a fresh share issue? Could that affect the amount of money that's actually needed beyond 13 million? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm seeing on social media, people saying, I would rather that £13 million went into the club. I think there's a wee bit of a misunderstanding here or some confusion, because this is not a straight choice between shall we put £13 million into the club or shall we buy Dave's shares for £13 million. The way the club has been funded over the last few years has been extraordinary. There were share issues and we did have the option to take part in those share issues. Those share issues were planned because the club needed the money. The board, under Dave's chairmanship, were very clear with supporters over that period that we were running at a deficit. Meanwhile, we were building a team that would become competitive. But that was not the way, that plan was not an indefinite plan. It wasn't the way that we expected, and it's not the way we continue to expect things to work at Rangers. So there may be share issues over the next year or over the next few years at Rangers. But what we expect, based on what we've been told at previous AGMs and in all our discussions with the club, is that the club is now approaching that period of self-sufficiency, where that funding model that we've had in place over the last 3 years won't be necessary anymore. So one of the things that we felt was important was that there is a gap, right? We've seen the accounts and we know that there's a funding gap. And one of the things we felt was very important was that Club 1872 would be able to step up and financially support the club by buying shares if that was required. So an agreement was reached with the Rangers board that should they require funding, that we will be allowed to participate if Resolution 8 passes at the upcoming AGM. And that's something that we will always be keen to look at and to discuss with the board. We never want to be in a position where the club is struggling financially. Meanwhile, we're giving money to Dave King. And I don't think Dave would want that to happen. In fact, I know that Dave wouldn't want that to be the position either. So at this moment in time, what we know for sure is that we have the opportunity to buy 66 million shares from Dave King. What we don't know is whether there will even be share issues that would allow us to invest directly in the club. So I think that we have to be realistic but also flexible. I think we have to be committed to the legacy campaign that we've launched, but we also have to be flexible. We have to maintain communication with the board. We have to be keeping an eye on what's happening at the club. We have to be looking at what the financial plans are and keep those options open in terms of whether or not we will be required to invest further.
Could I perhaps add to what Laura said there? Regarding the comment about whether the money should go straight into the club or not, is that at the last board meeting that I chaired earlier this year, which was the end of March, the position of the board was, and I believe remains, that after the current share conversion, which has just been finalised at the moment, is completed, that there is not the intention to have further share issues, and if such is required in the future, it will certainly not be at 20p. Therefore, to my knowledge, the opportunity for Club 1872 to acquire the shares at this level from the club is not going to exist. And I would go a step further and say, for example, if the club decided it would like access to the £13 million or whatever is raised, then I would be happy that if the club gave an unconditional undertaking to Club 1872, that over the next 3 years, it would allow it to acquire shares directly in the club and the money goes into the club, then I'd be willing to delay this deal with Club 1872 for another 3-4 years, because I've got no intention to sell. So all it would take is the club to turn around to Club 1872 and say, we will actually issue you shares over the next 3 years for all the money you raise. And I could solve it from that point of view. But my understanding is the club is not going to do that, does not want to do that, and that the club in future share issues will be looking to do it at levels far higher than 20p.
just to come back in, Stevie, I think it's not something that we would expect the club to require. It's great to know that Dave has made that offer, that if the club allow us to participate at that level, that he'll be comfortable with that. But we are looking, as I said, at a period of self-sufficiency. There are other ways for the club to fund the gap that exists. So we would be looking at, player trading, increased commercial income. I know that you, Stevie, have written a number of blogs about the deal with Castore and how that is going to radically change the club's financial position. That was a good deal that was struck, and we expect commercial income to increase as a result of that. Income from European competition, for example, these are ways that a healthy, normal business would plug any gap that exists. It's always been the plan, as I understand it, that the club would move to that position where those kind of that kind of income was funding any gap that exists. And we have no indication from the board that has changed. There may have been some impact from COVID. We don't know the details of that yet, but we do know that there are other means available to the Rangers board to plug the gap. And we wouldn't expect a healthy, normal functioning business to be relying on its customers, which, if in some ways supporters are, to continually plug that gap.
Dave, if I'm right in saying this, you have a £5 million investment loan that is due to be repaid by October 2021. Is that correct? And can you clarify the situation with that?
No, that is correct. And it's exactly as I stated at the AGM last November, that, with me living in South Africa with exchange control restrictions, the exchange control authorities would not allow me to make any further direct share investment into Rangers. They needed money at the time. And the only way for me to advance money was on a loan basis, just because of the circumstances at the club. So I agreed to do that. It was a 2-year loan. I think you're right. It's probably due around about October 21, I think, somewhere about there. And it's within the club's current cash requirements to repay that loan. So I would expect it to be repaid on time.
Hi, Dave. Is there interest on that loan as well, or is it interest free?
No, there is interest in that loan. Again, as I announced at the AGM, it was one of the points that I made at the AGM in terms of me reaching the end of my useful life for the club. I said that, with my increasing restrictions on exchange control, it become increasingly difficult for me to make interest-free loans because they just weren't being approved by exchange control. And I pointed out it was at a market interest rate. I think it was 8%. And that really kind of reinforced to me, to some extent, the end of my time at Rangers. I think we got it to a stage where my money certainly had helped get the club out of intensive care into a fairly robust and healthy patient. But I think that my time really was up, and it was time for me to pass it on to other people.
Do you see a point in the future, Dave, where if the club needed further external financing, external investment, that you could come back in, or as far as you're concerned, is that your money done? Your time as a benefactor and an investor is now over? Yeah, no,
I think it is over, and I've said it's over. I mean, the future, you don't know what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years' time, but certainly, if you were to ask me at the moment, I think it is over, and I think it's over in the sense that the club just don't require it anymore. And if I look at the club's financial statements that were released to the end of June, it was nice to see that the club is in such a strong financial position that it was able to incur further investments. Okay, it does require some short-term loans. I think Douglas and John have kindly stepped in to play the role that I was doing previously by advancing that money. But they could have done the alternative. They could have sold Freddie Morelos. So I think they've now got that level of financial flexibility where they can decide to trade players or not. I think over a long period of time, player trading will be part of the business model, and it has to be part of the business model. But it's nice to know that from season to season, the board is in a position to say, we're actually going to bring in 2 strikers and not sell Alfredo. Or we might sell him next year. And that just indicates the level of financial flexibility that the club's got. And it's partly, the ongoing recovery as we've slowly built up the balance sheet. And it's partly, quite frankly, the impact of the decision to bring in Steven Gerrard, where we've seen not only improved financial metrics in terms of performance in Europe, but what we've also seen is that the showcasing of our talent has not only boosted the value of the players in terms of what they've achieved in Europe, but also allowed them to bring in players of a better quality with greater value. So I really think the club, cash flow wise, balance sheet wise, is in a very, very, very strong position, which is another reason why I'm absolutely certain there'll be no share issues at 20p. And certainly if I was chairing the board, I wouldn't be issuing shares at 20p again. I think that time is over.
Laura mentioned earlier on the kind of sugar daddy aspect. No, fans always want their club to have a benefactor that are just going to put money in year after year. Is there a sense that with this deal, if it succeeds and the fans keep putting their money in after your shares are bought, in effect, the fans could be that benefactor? If you have 20,000 paying £10 or £20 a month, over time that money is going to build up. So if in a couple of years' time the club did need external finance, they wouldn't have to go to one of the members of the board or one of the investors. They could actually take that money from the supporters, and the supporters be that figure.
I think Laura is 100% on that, because if you look at how we've done with benefactors, we had David Murray, and he had 19 fantastic years, to be fair to David, but it all fell apart, and we thought we had a benefactor, and that benefactor got the club into trouble. The next benefactor was Craig White. The next benefactor was Mike Ashley in the Easdales. So we've not done very well over the last 10 years with benefactors. And I repeat, never again. We are in a situation here to make sure it never happens again. And I think everyone should take advantage of this opportunity.
Yeah, just on the benefactor point, I think Dave's absolutely right. We had that for a long time with David Murray, and it worked. Like, we were successful under David Murray. We were winning titles, things were looking great. It worked until it didn't. And that's the risk that always exists unless we as a fan base step up and take responsibility for the club and for the protection of the club. That risk that it just won't work at some point in the future is always going to be there. Also, just in terms of a sort of income stream, a future income stream for the club, you're absolutely right, Chris. The Club 1872 model as it exists allows for Club 1872 to create and maintain additional revenue streams for the club. Now, I think Dave's right, and I've touched on it. We don't expect that to be required. We don't expect the club, which is now a healthy, functioning business, to require that funding in the form of through share issues. But Club 1872 shares and projects kicks are, when I say kicks, I mean community interest companies. The way those companies are structured means that the funds are ring-fenced. So any money that is donated for shares can only be spent on shares in Rangers International Football Club. Club 1872 is independently regulated and highly regulated. We've had a high level of interaction with the community interest company regulator. There's an asset lock in place so that legally we cannot sell those shares. And it's the same for we have a projects aspect of Club 1872 as well. And any funds that are donated to the project side of things are ring-fenced. It can only be spent on projects for the benefit of the Rangers community. So going forward, once we've completed this deal with Dave, if we require funds to maintain our shareholding, or if the membership decides it wants to continue to increase the shareholding, we'll have that revenue stream. We'll have people donating on a monthly basis, tens of thousands of Rangers fans donating £10 a month, talking a hefty revenue stream for the club. And if the membership decides that we want to increase our shareholding, or if we have to maintain our shareholding, we'll have the funds to do that. But we'll also have significant funds available to spend on projects for the benefit of the Rangers community. And that can be anything from changing the infrastructure around Ibrox. And one of the things that we've mentioned on the website, and I think we've spoken about it to the press, is that the 150th anniversary is coming up. So there are huge opportunities for us to make a really symbolic gesture, to protect the club and to create an additional revenue stream that can be spent on benefiting the Rangers community and the club.
I think one of the points that a lot of the fans have raised, Dave, is the timing of the announcement. They see things going well in the park and Rangers also making progress under the manager, both in the Premiership and the Europa League. And there's a fear that work is being overshadowed by share talk and fan talk. Was that a consideration for you? Did you think I might hold off until the end of the season before making this announcement, or do you just see this as more good news to go on top of the good news that's happening on the pitch?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the timing for this is when things are good. It's only because things are good that I can actually do this right now, because if they weren't good, I would still be considering the options and what happens regarding funding. So it's only because the club is in a strong position. And I think anyone that knows football knows that it doesn't begin at the end of the season. At the end of the season begins the next season. And there's always anxieties and concerns, the Champions League qualifying. So I think in terms of football clubs, it really is an ongoing kind of situation in terms of mood. So my thinking was certainly not affected by the mood on a day or the fact that the team is doing well and may or may not win a league. I think it's really about, I repeat, I was thinking, while I was here, I've got my shareholding, what should happen? I engaged with Club 1872, and the timing, whether it's whichever month, I think doesn't matter. The timing is right because the club is healthy, and this could only happen, I think, at a time when the club is healthy.
Have you had any offers for your shares in the past, Dave? Has anybody ever come to you and tried to buy out your major shareholding?
I've probably had about 5 or 6 over the years, including while I was chairman, where people will come from very Middle Eastern bits and pieces, but nothing that ever result in a conversation, because my view is I'm not there to invest in the club as part of my wealth portfolio. It was very much, as I've said before, a rescue operation from my point of view. It's not something I wanted to be doing. I took money I'd rather was invested elsewhere, put it into the club. And I'm very happy to get my money back or close to my money back. I'm hoping from Club 1872 point of view that I actually lose money, in the sense that I'd like them to do this quickly, because I really genuinely believe it's the right thing for the club. And I repeat, I'm willing to be very, very patient as long as Club 1872 and the supporters indicate there's an appetite for them to do this, because it's one thing for me to want it. I know Club 1872 executive want it, but we've got to make sure the supporters want it as well.
Just in terms of those offers that you had, did they ever get anywhere apart from an initial email or phone call? Was there never anything that would have tempted you to even open discussions with those potential investors or purchasers? No,
I think it happens with football clubs. I'm sure all owners and clubs get offers from time to time. But I repeat, I never viewed it as an investment to sell, because I could do that. I could sit, if the board are going to issue shares at higher levels, I could take the higher level and then sell my shares. I'm not in it. I didn't get involved in Rangers to make personal wealth out of it. I made my money available to the club at a time of need. I'd like to get back as much as I possibly can, but it was more about access to my capital and the time and effort I put in personally. And none of this was done for profit. In fact, it's the furthest thing from my mind.
How would you view your Rangers legacy, Dave? And is that something that's important to you, or something that you've ever considered or taken note of?
No, look, I would like to think that there is recognition, and I've had recognition, quite frankly. When I stepped down, there was a lot of recognition for the role that I played over the last number of years to help recover the club. But it was something I was able to do, and I certainly couldn't have done it without the support of the board and the supporters, and specifically I refer to Club 1872, who I worked very, very closely with. So, to me, it was a team effort. I was in a position to act as a catalyst, perhaps, to get the thing going. But I'm satisfied. I played my role. It's nice to see the club is where it is, and I'm very satisfied to move on, which is why, I've got no legacy need to be the chairman of Rangers, for example. Otherwise, I would have stayed on and tried to milk the benefits of, let's say, reap the rewards of my effort. I'm happy with what I did, and I'm happy it's ended. And, I guess in 100 years' time, people will look back in the little blip and they'll say there was a guy called Dave King helped save the club. But I think no more and no less than that. I really don't regard myself as being much different from other supporters who've sacrificed, who've bought, kit and bought tickets and emotionally get involved in boycotts. Because I know when, we're trying to get the kind of Ashley Easdale access out of the club, I know how difficult it was for supporters to not support the club. And I was making these appeals to supporters and saying, look, please, you've got to do this. And, the supporters have really given so much to this. So I really regard myself as being one of many of them. And I'd be delighted if, as my final legacy, I can pass my shareholding on to them.
In terms of the board representation, I know you said in your press interviews with us last week that you hoped 1872 would then get a seat at the boardroom. How would that work in terms of a day-to-day basis? What influence and say do they then have on key decision making process? Did you, as chairman, with your 20%, did you then have more of a say when it came to decisions? And how big a say can the fans actually have going forward here?
I mean, I had more of a say in the sense that I was the chairman of the board, I was the largest shareholder, and I was the one who primarily was putting in the money. I mean, so I was putting in a larger share than the others, therefore that gives one a level of influence. But, from a board point of view, I could have stepped down and I could have asked for my son, say, to be in the board. the same way that Douglas and Graham are on the board. I mean, I could have done that. I chose not to do that because, my children, they're involved in the businesses, but they don't have the passion for it. They're not Scottish, so it's a different environment for them. And, if I look at Club 1872, I would expect Club 1872 would want to sit on the board, but the challenge for Club 1872 is going to be to find an individual who can represent them on the board and make sure their interests are looked after on the board, but understanding that individual, because of confidentiality, will not be able to report back to Club 1872. So it's a kind of awkward relationship because the director will have access to confidential information that they will not be able to share with the members of Club 1872. So I would imagine, and Laura is probably best able to answer this, that they would have to get some independent professional person or someone from within 1872 who steps away from it to represent them on the board. But they're just going to have to manage the exchange of information because, I repeat, a board member gets confidential information that he would not be in a position to pass back to the supporters who make up Club 1872.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, just as a general point, by the way, I would encourage anyone who's curious or who has questions about Club 1872 and how it works to check out the website. And we have an FAQ section. And there are two FAQs that I think are relevant to this part of our discussion. And that one is, will Club 1872 be involved in the day-to-day running of the football club? There are people who think that that's what fan ownership means. That's absolutely not the case. And we go into a wee bit more detail about that on the website. The other question is, how will it work if we have a seat on the board? And it is a stated aim of the organisation. We polled members in 2017, I think, maybe 2018, about whether we should have a seat at the board. And we almost immediately opened discussions with Dave at that point. And those discussions were positive discussions over a period of time. And it's always been something that we believe that we're working towards. We wouldn't be putting forward anyone who sits on the Club 1872 board just for the reasons that Dave has just mentioned. I think it's important that we're clear about that. We would identify suitable candidates, and we would be looking for someone who has the experience, the confidence, the gravitas, the knowledge, the skills that would be appropriate to sit on the RIFC board. There are no current directors. I know that I can speak for myself and the other directors at this point who are at this stage remotely interested in sitting on the RIFC board. We're very much a working board at Club 1872. We're very hands-on. We're involved in the day-to-day running of Club 1872, and that's where we feel comfortable. It's where we feel our skill set lies. But yeah, we would be looking at an appropriate candidate to sit on the board, and it wouldn't be someone who sits on the board of Club 1872 because that just wouldn't work. And it would be a process that we would have to look at very, very carefully. I think it's also important, again, this is a more general point, to remind people that all key decisions are taken by Club 1872 members. So while the board would hold private discussions, I would imagine, with suitable candidates, any major decisions about how it would work when we sit on the board or who would sit on the board would be subject to a member vote.
As far as you're aware, Dave, would the rest of the Rangers board be open to a fan representative, or if you like, or a Club 1872 representative being on the board, or would they be met wearily, or is that something you'd discussed previously, and are you confident that situation would evolve as you hope?
Well, I would imagine they'd be delighted. I mean, one of the things that we did over the last couple of years was to try and bring Club 1872 and supporters closer to the board, because again, we're very, very conscious of the level of disconnect that the supporters had with the club for a number of years during the Craig White, Ashley Easdale era. So it was one of the priorities of the board has been to kind of reintroduce regular contact with Club 1872 and to try and kind of bring supporters back into the fold and make sure that not only were their voices able to be heard, but they understood that the board was taking them very, very seriously as the supporters deserve. Because I repeat, we wouldn't be here today without the support of the supporters, and you can't, just reverse that and say, well, things are good now, therefore we rely less on supporters. Yeah, you might rely, as Laura said, less on supporters funding the club, but supporters are still your customers. So from any point of view, I think every board wants to be close to its customer.
Probably a question for you both. Do you think that Club 1872, as it's set up just now with the infrastructure that it's got, is it equipped and is it able to, one, handle a shareholding of 25% should it get there, and set up to have the kind of influence that you hope for? Or does the organisation need beefed up and expanded, and what has to happen to be into position to actually make the most of this opportunity should it arrive?
I think I'm very confident that the structure and governance side of things is taken care of at Club 1872. We have a robust set of articles of association that were drafted in collaboration with the membership. We went through a consultation period, and we worked very closely with the independent regulator of community interest companies to create a set of articles, or to create a constitution that was fit for purpose and that best represents what Club 1872 is trying to do. It enshrines members' rights. So on the governance and structure side of things, I think Club 1872 is in very good shape. And I know that we've had very in-depth conversations with Dave about that. He's aware of how all that works and the process that we've been through. So to have his personal endorsement, like, I think Dave was very humble when he was talking about, his legacy and how he will be remembered. I don't want to embarrass you, Dave, but I think that you're a person, I know that you're a person that the Rangers support trusts. So for us to have that endorsement from you is a really nice thing. But as I say, we also did all that in conjunction with the KIC regulator. So, a highly regulated entity, which has a robust constitution in place, is well placed to take on this challenge and to manage the shareholding. Operationally, though, that's another matter. I think it should be fairly obvious, and it's certainly something that the current board is aware of, that operationally we will need to ramp things up. I think you said, will things need to be beefed up? Certainly yes, on the operational side of things. So at the moment, we have one member of staff at Club 1872, one person who's paid for their involvement at Club 1872, and that's the admin assistant, and she deals with account queries. And while I'm speaking, I'm going to give a wee shout out to that person. Her name is Lil. She's our admin assistant, and she has been an absolute trooper the last few days. The level of interest that we've had has been phenomenal. And that's not just from people signing up, that's from people emailing us or contacting us on social media and asking either general or specific questions about how this works and how they can get involved. And every morning I wake up and there are emails or text messages from Lil sent at 1 or 2 in the morning, because she's really putting in some shift to help us work through that. What is actually a backlog now of emails. We're still working our way through hundreds of emails from people who are keen to get involved. But at the moment, that's the only person that who's paid to be involved at Club 1872. We obviously pay accountancy fees and things. All our accounts are prepared and filed by a chartered accountancy firm. So and I think we pay, for example, there's an admin cost attached to the mass email system that we use. So we have a system that we pay, I think it's like 170 quid a month. So there are costs attached to that. But as the membership increases, there's absolutely no doubt that operationally we will have to beef things up. We will have to strengthen the organisation. We will have to look at things like increased costs for marketing, advertising, executive support. And actually, if you compare Club 1872 to similar organisations, they're not the same, but they are very similar within the Rangers community. If we look at the Rangers Charity Foundation or Rangers Youth Development Company, those are organisations that have at the helm a chief exec who oversees several members of staff who process their admin side of things, who deal with queries. They pay for advertising as any business or organisation would. And that's certainly something that we'll have to look at Club 1872. And it's something that we are looking at currently. But the bottom line of this is that we don't have the funds in place just now. We have a very limited admin budget. We have 5% that we can, spend on admin. And we have been very careful, over the last few years to minimise those admin costs. But if we want this to work, we're going to have to invest in it. We're going to have to increase our spending. And we will be in a much better position to do this as the membership grows. The more money we have coming in, the more we can use to operationally support the organisation and promote the organisation. And that's certainly something that we're looking at doing at this moment.
Dave, you mentioned during your press interviews during the week, and also referenced it there, the Mike Ashley fight that you undertook over so long. That seemed to come to an end in the summer with the custodial. How big a moment was that for Rangers? And are you confident that period of Ashley and Sports Direct, is that now fully behind the club and fully behind Rangers, and there's not going to be any sort of legacy issues there.
Yeah, I think it is important. As far as Sports Direct is concerned, even though we effectively commercially had them out of our lives probably about 2 years ago, there still were residual aspects of these contracts where they were quite relentless in dragging us before court. So it was costing a lot of money. I mean, I don't know what the final figure would be, but we might have to, spend another, say, £2 million just in legal fees. So just to have that kind of wasted expenditure behind the club, I think is fantastic. And I'm absolutely certain that Sports Direct is completely out of the club.
If you're looking back at your things that you achieved and you're comparing a list of, or perhaps you're ranking them in terms of order, how big an achievement is a Sports Direct fight for you? How much pleasure do you take from how that has eventually turned out for the club?
Well, the Sports Direct was critical in the sense that the kind of jaws of death that Mike Ashley had around the club were firmly locked in through various legal relationships. And if we were unable to unlock that, then the club could not have made the progress that it made over the last couple of years. So, the dealing with Mike Ashley and Sports Direct was absolutely vital to getting to the position we've reached today. And I think from Mike Ashley's point of view as well, the extent to which, a businessman of, that immense wealth and capability, invested in Rangers and get involved in this just indicates how important it was to him as well. It's the fact that he wanted to win. And I mean, the mere fact that the absurdity of him trying to put me in jail over Christmas for contempt of court, just for looking after Rangers' interests, just indicates, the depths and the levels of, quite frankly, disgusting behaviour, I think, that Sports Direct went to try and retain their grip on Rangers. So it's absolutely vital that we've been able to release that completely, definitely, and absolutely.
Now that period is behind Rangers, what kind of financial benefits do you see that going forward? How big a moment can that be in helping the club grow? Obviously, we'll still to really see the revenues from that in the accounts, but you look at the uptake from the fans in the summer, that could prove to be one of the real key turning points for the club.
Yeah, it's significant because while we were spending time in the courts disputing with Sports Direct, it meant our ability to enter into a more lucrative retail deal was completely taken away from us. So, the whole Castore deal and certainly the greatly enhanced commercial conditions that the club is enjoying right now, and the success that James Bisgrove has had. I mean, James Bisgrove has been phenomenal for the club since he came on board. None of that would have been possible without getting rid of the anchor of Sports Direct. So it's been absolutely vital, I repeat.
Sorry, Laura, you go.
Yeah, no, just from a supporter point of view, I'll never forget when we closed that deal to purchase Mike Ashley shares, because it was just Joanne and I who were involved at that point on the board in those discussions, and we knew what a significant marker in Club 1872's history that was going to be. We knew what it meant for the club. We knew what it meant for Club 1872. And we're in contact, it's my colleague on the board, Ewan McFarlane, who interacts with them, but we're in contact with fans groups at Newcastle, and they have told us repeatedly that they would give anything to be in the position that Club 1872 were in, where they were able to participate in removing that toxic influence from their club. And I think we have to look back and say that was a huge moment for Club 1872. At that point, we became the second largest shareholder. That's an indication of what Club 1872 can achieve. And I think, like Dave's right, supporters have backed the club in terms of purchasing retail kit and all that. And that has been an emotional thing for the support. I bought a strip for my son. We want to wear the kit because we have that emotional connection to the club, and because we're proud to wear it, and we wear it out and about because you want to let people know you're a Rangers fan. But it was more than that. Emotionally speaking, there was a real sense of pride, I think, that we were able to buy kit again over the summer. There was a real feeling of, this is a real marker in the club's history, that we have moved beyond that really toxic period. So I think Dave's right. I don't think we can underplay the importance of that. And we've had lots of dealings with the James Bisgrove and have almost always been very, very impressed by him. I think he's done a great job commercially at the club, and I think that we are in a good position, and that fans are absolutely right to get behind the retail part of the club and to feel good about it. And, you know, why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we feel good after everything we've been through over the last few years?
Just finally from me, Dave, you mentioned earlier on how you felt it was important for the board, minus you and McDouglas now as chairman, to steer Rangers through the COVID crisis. How do you feel that, one, they've done that from a financial point of view, and two, their fight, if you like, with the SFA and SPFL and making their feelings clear? Did they handle that situation how you would have done and how you approve of?
As far as the board's performance is concerned, I think they've done fantastically well. I mean, to be in the position they are on the park this year is, you know, partly the level of management team we've got, but he needed the support of the board, and the board's been able to do that and show a level of financial flexibility, which indicates that the club is back, that we're strong, and we're there. So as far as I'm concerned, the process of recovery is effectively complete. And the board have just been absolutely fantastic and just continuing with what we started a number of years ago. As far as the SFA, SPFL, I just haven't followed that, so I honestly can't comment. I'm just distant from it here in South Africa. I don't really do much in following kind of social media. I'm not on any social media, so I really have got no idea as to what's going on with the SFA, the SPFL and the club.
It was probably not a bad summer for you to be missing everything that's went on. I think there's quite a few people would have been quite happy if they could have just stayed out of the whole time. Well,
we have had our challenges down here, but at least we're doing it in sunny weather.
Dave, thank you so much for taking your time this morning to speak to us. And one thing that everybody wanted us to do on social media, and something personally I would like to do, is thank you for all your efforts for our football club back in 2015 when you stepped up along with the other board members to try and wrestle the club away from those who were currently occupying the boardroom. There's not anybody or any Rangers fan that doesn't have a debt of gratitude for everything you've done for the club, and have helped steer us back to where you are now. You commented and said that you've done nothing more than what a normal Rangers fan would do. A lot of us really appreciate that you went above and beyond, and would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for everything you've done.
Thank you for your kind words. That's very, very generous of you. But I repeat, I couldn't have done it without the existing board and without the help of all the supporters. But thank you for these kind words. And
before you go, do you have a message to the Rangers support at the moment?
No, my message is, things are going well. We've got the club back to what we wanted to do, which is competing for titles in Scotland and competing again in Europe. But let's not be relaxed. Just remember, the good times are here now, but it is very, very important that supporters back this campaign by Club 1872, and we make sure that never again can the club go through what was happened over the last decade.
A huge thank you to Dave King for joining us this morning. He's taken over an hour of his time, and I think he answers a lot of fantastic points. But I'd like to thank Laura, who stayed on to answer some questions regarding Club 1872, which is hugely appreciated. Laura, again, thanks for your time this morning.
No, thank you for having me.
No, of course, I appreciate you've stayed on. Laura, this is really a chance to bottom out some questions about Club 1872. So I'm just going to go straight into it. There's a lot of people out there are dubious about Club 1872. How do you change that perspective?
I think the first part of changing that perspective is to acknowledge that it's completely understandable that people are dubious about Club 1872. Given where we've been as a support, I think we are a support that is naturally cautious about pretty much anything related to our club. So I think it's important for us to say that we understand that, and that we are committed to engaging with people, to talking to them, to answering their questions. I think it's also really important to talk about how we answer people's questions. I think communication with the support is the key. Now, I mentioned in our chat there with Dave that we do have a very limited admin budget. So that means things like marketing and advertising hasn't been anywhere near what we would have wanted it to be. But we have done our best in terms of communication, and there are always improvements to be made. What we can't do is man social media 24/7. We can't be answering the same questions all the time, every day, but we can make a big effort to engage. If you have a look at our Twitter feed, for example, you'll see that we've been answering general questions as well as specific questions. We've worked really hard on the website, and we have what I think is a really good set of FAQs that we will be updating, and we have updated even in the last few days as more questions come in and we get a better feel for the areas or the aspects of this that people are still a bit unsure of. We can update those FAQs. We can do things like this pod. We can speak to you. We can speak to other fan media. We have made efforts to engage with the mainstream media, and those are efforts that will continue. But I think as well, when I say that communication is important, I think it's not just about what we tell supporters. It's about us listening to supporters as well, asking them, what are your questions about this? What aspects of this make you unsure? And also just reminding people generally that most of the information people require is out there. It's either on our website, or if you're asking questions about governance, constitution, how Club 1872 is set up, that information is on Companies House. We have a link to it on our website. So I think it's important for us to speak with the support, but also what I would be asking people, if you're a Club 1872 supporter, if you're a donating member and someone who believes in Club 1872, help us out. If you see things on social media that you think that doesn't sound quite right. So for example, if you see someone saying Club 1872 never communicate, with their members, you'll know that you receive regular emails from us. You'll know that you receive quarterly updates that are very detailed. Feel free to share that, whether it's on social media. Speak to your friends and family, encourage them to visit the website. Let's sort of develop a sense of collective responsibility for this. Let's sort of look at ourselves and say, what can I do to help make this work? But look, there's certainly a job to be done in reaching bigger audiences, reaching elements of the support that we've never reached before. We did have some roadshows in the past with RSCs, and we were just sort of getting going on that front when the situation changed, and obviously with COVID, we're just not able to hold meetings like that. It was a previous director of Club 1872, Bruce Taylor, who took responsibility for that, who led on that front, and delighted to say that Bruce is still actively involved in the organisation. He's on a working group, and he's going to be working again with RSCs over the course of this campaign to engage with them. So again, if you know someone who's in an RSC, if you're an RSC secretary, please feel free to get in touch. We will be looking at roadshows and various sort of meetings and events when we're able to do it. We also have an office at Ibrox. It's in Copeland House, and Club 1872 directors are always there before home games. That sort of open door policy is there. Some of us go in and out during the working week when we can. We're all volunteers and we all fit this around our jobs and family commitments and whatnot, but that open invitation is there certainly before matches. And if people want to make appointments to see us, you don't need to meet, you don't need to wait for us to have a members meeting, although we do hold those regularly when we're able to. Obviously current circumstances don't allow for that, but this is a board that is very much open to engaging with the membership, and there's certainly work to be done in terms of reaching a wider audience. And we're hoping we've had a really good sort of initial response to this, and we're hoping that as the membership grows and the admin budget increases, that we'll be able to look at advertising and marketing and professional support in that respect that we haven't been able to rely on before.
Laura, one of the main things that people always say is, why has there been no meetings and no elections recently, and why didn't you go to your members and ask them regarding buying Dave King's shares?
Yeah, so there have been elections recently. There was an election in February, and myself and 4 other members were elected. Sorry, no, that's not true. 2 other members, Joanne and Ewan. Elections are staggered at Club 1872, so there was 3 places available in February. So we have had elections recently. In line with our constitution, which I think I mentioned earlier, we drafted in collaboration with the membership. We went through an intense consultation period, and in line with our constitution, there's no requirement for us to hold elections as soon as a board place becomes available. And we have to look at what we believe is the right time to hold an election. So in recent months, we have been, Dave went into this a bit, it was very confidential. But there was a lot of work involved in getting the agreement we've put in place to the point where we were ready to present it to the support. Even just in terms of the website, you know, there was a lot of work done to prepare the website for that. We've got a brand new subscription system that has involved myself, some of the working group members and our admin assistant working very closely with the web developer to get that ready. So we didn't think that that would have been an appropriate time when we were heavily focused on preparing for this campaign to hold an election. But there will be elections in the future. No Club 1872 director has ever been appointed without there being an election period. Directors or potential directors are required to submit an application, and that is shared with the membership. The membership are given opportunities to question potential candidates. It's a very open and transparent process. Again, we've always asked an independent adjudicator to come in and oversee the elections, and that's something that we'll always do in the future. Again, that's written into the Club 1872 constitution. So yeah, we will hold elections, and again, as per our constitution, we're required to hold one members' meeting a year. That has always happened. It hasn't happened this year, simply because we just can't. I mean, like, we would be breaking the law if we had that kind of mass gathering. But yeah, we do hold meetings. Most years that I've been on the board, we've had several members' meetings throughout the period of any given year. And as I said, we are, under normal circumstances, you can meet the Club 1872 board anytime you like. You know, just pop in before a match day. The office in Copeland House is an open door policy. We'll make you a cup of tea. But in terms of more formal meetings, yeah, that's definitely something that we have done in the past. We haven't been able to do it in recent months, but it's something we'll pick up again as soon as we're able to do it. There was another question at the end there, Stevie, but I've just forgotten what it was. Can you remind me?
Why did you not go to Club 1872 members regarding purchasing Dave King's shareholding? Why have you taken this decision? It seems to be a bit of a closed house decision. Why not go to the fans with it?
Because it's the core function of the organisation is to buy shares. So anyone who has signed up to Club 1872 has already, in the act of signing up for Club 1872, agreed that they are in favour of us purchasing shares in Rangers International Football Club. It is the core function of the Club 1872 shares company. So it's something that we never need to go to members about. It's not a key decision. Again, we talk about members leading the organisation and always taking key decisions. It's not listed. Buying shares is not listed. And again, that constitution was drawn up in close collaboration with the KIC regulator, and a decision was made that buying shares would not be a key decision because it's part of the core function of the organisation anyway. A lot of the share purchases that we have made in the past and that we will continue to make, certainly with Dave, are confidential in nature. There are various reasons why we wouldn't want to share that with the membership until the deal is absolutely in place, until we've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's and made sure that this is, you know, a viable thing to present to the membership. But buying shares is a key function, a core function of the organisation, so it's never something that we poll members on.
Last one from me before Chris kind of comes in. Something that has been aimed at you, Laura, and I think it's really important to be kind of bottomed out, is that people accuse you of taking salary and taking money out of Club 1872. Can you address directly, do you take a salary? Are you paid? And who else is involved entirely in Club 1872, and do they take a salary?
Yeah. So the only person who takes a salary is Lil, the admin assistant, and we've been very open and clear and transparent about that since Lil was appointed. And Lil was appointed actually before my time on the board. I think that was the working group who put Lil in place. Nobody else takes a salary for their involvement in Club 1872. Again, this was something that we wanted to give people assurance on when we were drafting the articles. So it's written into our constitution that directors will not receive any financial benefit from being involved at Club 1872. No director has even claimed expenses in relation to their work at Club 1872. For myself, I'm very involved in the admin side of things at Club 1872, and we do a lot of that from the office space. So I'm back and forth, travel expenses, whatnot. I've never claimed. I'm not doing this for any kind of financial benefit. I actually saw something, I think it was on Facebook, someone sent me a screenshot of it, so I don't know what page it was on, but it looked to me like it was from a Facebook page, and I think it was referring to the admin budget and what that admin budget might be, if we raise the funds required to buy Dave's shareholding. But it said, if Club 1872 raise the required amount to buy Dave's shares, Laura Fawkes, Joanne Percival and Ewan McFarlane will each receive £200,000. Now, that would make for a cracking Christmas night out, right? No doubt about it, but it's just not true. It's even if we wanted to, even if we had a board in place that were thinking, how can I benefit from this? We are prevented, as per the Constitution, from benefiting financially from Club 1872. Just in terms of how it's structured and who's involved and who's behind it, I think we've already covered the fact that it's a member-led organisation. So if you mean who's behind Club 1872 in terms of who holds the power at Club 1872, that would be the membership. All key decisions are taken by the Club 1872 membership. There is a board in place, that's myself, Joanne and Ewan at the moment, and the board's role is to oversee things in terms of sort of the governance side of it. We also have a really strong team of volunteers who sit on working groups. We have a number of working groups in place, and anyone from the membership can volunteer for a working group. In fact, one of the things that's been really nice to see over the last few days is that people who have just signed up are also emailing in to say, I'm really excited about this. Is there anything more I can do? And the answer is yes. You can come and meet with the board. You can have a chat with us about how the organisation functions. And if it's something you're interested in, if you've got the skill set to bring to the table, you can become involved in a working group. And that can be anything from helping out with social media to looking at potential projects for the organisation to fund. There are various ways for people to get involved. And again, all of this is written into the Constitution to make sure that we have a robust working model in place that members can feel, that members can trust, and that they feel offers some degree of protection for the organisation and a degree of security. So Club 1872 is effectively managed on a day-to-day basis by myself and the other directors. We're very much a working board, but we are assisted by working group members. All of them are volunteers. Nobody is paid for their involvement in Club 1872. That's not to say that we might not at some point have to professionalise the organisation. In fact, as I said earlier, we almost certainly will. We will look at executive support. We will look at increasing our spend on accountants, for example. We will look at advertising, marketing professionals to support the organisation. But again, those are all things that will be done while we communicate with the membership. The members will be the first to know if we're making any changes in terms of how we operationally run Club 1872. And in terms of how the board is structured and the rules that are put in place through the Constitution, we can't make any changes to those without 75% of the membership approving it via a member poll. So there are no plans in place at this stage for any particular individual within Club 1872 to sort of stage a coup or take control of the organisation, even if they wanted to. It's just not a possibility with the structure that we have in place.
I think one of the things that comes across quite a lot, Laura, is the disparate nature of the Rangers fans at times. Now, Rangers fans say they're all part of the Rangers family, but you do get various factions and there's various different things going on at different times. How do you bring that very separate group at times? How do you bring that together and harness the power of the Rangers fans?
Well, I think, it's certainly true, right, that there are loads of disagreements within the Rangers support. Everyone will have heard that thing by now about, if there were 3 Rangers supporters on a desert island, there would be 4 supporters clubs by the end of the day. But I think it's really important for us. I think we're quite hard on ourselves in that respect, right? Yeah, there are disagreements within the Rangers support, but with any significant group of people, there are going to be differences of opinion. The Rangers board won't always agree on things. And certainly even at board level at Club 1872, we don't always agree on things. So I think we should accept that there are going to be people within the Rangers support who are not quite on board with this yet and who might never be on board with it. I think what we have to do is listen to people and do our very best to meet everyone's needs and to manage everyone's expectations. But Club 1872 allows, it's a one member, one vote system. So everyone gets a vote and we accept the will of the majority. We accept the majority decision in terms of how we vote our shares. Like, for example, Club 1872 members are voting as we speak on how we vote our shares at the upcoming AGM. So it's democracy. It's democracy in action. It's a democratic member-led organisation. We will always do our best to sort of to meet everyone's needs and to make sure that as many people as possible are happy with what we're doing. But we can't please everyone, and I think it's important that we're honest with people about that. But for me, I tend to look at the bigger picture. So one of the things we found is, for example, if we put a statement out that's not so popular with the Rangers support, people might cancel their memberships. That's happened in the past. There are things that Club 1872 has done that I have not been in agreement with. I can't actually think of them off the top of my head, but there's been times where I've been unsure about a particular project that's been put out for a member vote or whatever. But I look at the bigger picture and I think, okay, I'm not getting my way on that one thing. And I would ask the supporters to do the same. So if you see a statement from Club 1872 that you don't quite like, or there's a tweet put out and you don't quite like the tone of it, you don't think it's the way we should be conducting ourselves on Twitter or whatever, please bear the bigger picture in mind. If we do, like we've talked about this in detail, obviously, with Dave. What we have right now on the board, or in terms of investors, is a very healthy mix, right? So we have high net worth fan investors. We have Club 1872 investing on behalf of the Rangers support, the wider support, and then we have individuals who will be investing for a financial return. And I think that it's important that we acknowledge that that is working at the moment. We have great faith and trust in this board, and with no reason to doubt them at this stage. And it's like I said earlier, the way we had things under David Murray worked until it didn't work. In 2012, we faced the club being in absolute peril. We were kicked down to the gutter, and it was a horrible time for the club and a horrible time for supporters. And if we could go back in time to that point, would we be looking at it and saying, well, yeah, I'd quite like to save the club, but I really didn't like the way they worded that particular statement, so no, I'm not gonna get involved. We wouldn't. Things like that would have paled in comparison at that time to what previous fans groups were trying to achieve, and they should pale in comparison to what we're trying to achieve now. Now, that's not to say that if you're a Club 1872 member, you should just suck it up. If we're doing something you don't like, tough, keep your eye on the bigger picture and ignore everything else. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. We're engaging with supporters, we're engaging through social media, we're engaging through email. Myself and one other director man that email account along with the admin assistant. She deals with sort of more account inquiries. So if someone emails in and says, I'm trying to get in, but I've lost my password, how do I change it? If people have, as they have done, emailed in the last few days and say, I think I'm a member, or I thought I was a member, but I've just realised that my card expired 3 months ago and I didn't renew it. How do I update it now? Lil will deal with that kind of thing. But we have directors answering emails that come in from supporters. So we are engaging with the support, and we will listen to criticisms, to complaints, to concerns. What we won't do, I have to be honest about this, we won't respond to personal abuse, and we do get some of that. But in terms of engaging with genuine concern, genuine criticism, constructive criticism, absolutely happy to do that. But please, I would urge everyone to please keep an eye on the bigger picture. We're never going to please everyone. We're never going to get a situation where every Rangers fan who believes in fan representation is completely happy with what we're doing at Club 1872. But it is about that bigger picture. It's about where we've been. Last week when he's speaking to the press, Dave, you mentioned the term "lest we forget," and my mum always says, this too shall pass, and she always says, but remember that applies to the good times as well as the bad. So set your life up. She's good with the advice. Set your life up in a way that should you end up in hard times again, that you're prepared for it and you've got that stability. And it's exactly the same for the Rangers support. We are enjoying where we are now, and absolutely we should be. The club is in great shape. I really liked the way Dave described it. You know, he took it when it was in intensive care, and it's now a very healthy patient. We should feel good about that. We should feel good about the part that we've played in it. We should have gratitude towards the current Rangers board, and we should have faith in the current Rangers board. But we also should be mindful of where we've been. So in terms of how we bring the support together, I think it's about managing people's expectations and keeping our eye on that bigger picture.
So a huge thanks to Laura for joining us. Laura, thanks for taking up, or thanks for giving us so much of your time this morning, over 90 minutes with us. Hopefully we've answered everything for the fans that have been asking questions. Can you tell us a wee bit more? You said you mentioned a couple of times about FAQs and things. Can you tell the support how to find them?
Yeah, it's on our website. So it's just club1872.co.uk. If you have any specific questions, or if there's anything that you read on the website that isn't clear, if there's anything you feel we haven't covered, or if you have any further questions, you can email us. As I say, board members will pick up your email. If it's an account query, Lil will pick it up, and that's at info@club1872.co.uk. We're also making a bigger effort now to engage on social media. So you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Again, we're relying on volunteers to help us out with that. So you might not get an answer right away. And at the moment, even by email, there's a massive backlog. We've been working through hundreds of emails. And as we're answering one email, another email's coming in. And that's great. Like, I'm not complaining about that. All these people are showing an interest in legacy memberships. But I would encourage people to visit the website, to follow us on social media. And if there's anything you're unsure about, do get in contact. And happy to come on the pod again, happy to engage via the blog. I think we did a written Q&A before, Stevie.
Yeah, we did. Yep.
We did. Happy to do things like that again. You're right, we've been on a while, but we knew that the time was going to be limited. So if there are any questions that weren't addressed there, as I say, there are various ways that people can get in touch. But also, as I say, we're sort of assessing the questions as they come in. We're using them to inform how we adapt the FAQs. And also just to remind people that we do put a quarterly report out, and a quarterly report is due actually this month, or maybe next month, I'm not entirely sure. So we'll be doing that, and that will be an in-depth sort of roundup of where we've been, a summary of the campaign and what it's about and what it'll have achieved so far at that point. So that will be coming your way if you're a Club 1872 member. And as I say, if you know people who aren't Club 1872 members who you think would be interested in that level of detail, please do feel free to share that kind of information with them.
Laura, thank you very much for joining us, and we will hopefully speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
A huge thank you to both Laura and Dave for joining us this morning. I appreciate it's been a long podcast, but we tried our best to do and ask everything you wanted. Chris, it's not really a podcast where I want to give my opinion too much, because I think we should put out the information and just let people decide, but certainly couldn't have asked for any more from Laura and from Dave regarding the time they gave us this morning.
No, it's great to have the two of them on. The two of them have always been great to deal with and great to speak to. Dave has also done a few interviews over the last few days to discuss that, so you can tell how passionate he is about it and how much he believes in it. He's always been a type of guy you can ask him anything and he'll give you an answer. So hopefully we've managed to get to the bottom of not just the Club 1872 deal, but a few other things that have been going around the club over the last few months and last few years. And hopefully the fans have appreciate the effort that we've put into it. Certainly appreciate Dave's time coming on, and whatever people make of the answers. Now that's a personal opinion. We can only ask the questions, put the information out there, and I think Dave and Laura have been great with their time, great with their answers, and I wish them well in terms of their endeavours going forward.
Yeah, this was a penultimate, second from last podcast for us. Our final episode will be released in the next few weeks in time for Christmas, and we are going to sit down, myself, Chris, Mary will be back with us as well, and we're going to sit down with Chris Boyd and hopefully another special guest as well. So it'll be a double whammy on our final ever 4LadsHadADream podcast. I say final ever, but final for the moment, Chris, as we take a wee well-earned break.
As Dave was saying there, you never know how things are going to go in the future. You can only take it as they come. So I think I've certainly done well. Certainly proud of the content and the podcast that we've put out since we started doing this. I think that's certainly up there with one of the best of them. But going from managers to cup wins to league wins to having Billy on last time around was really special for you, and it was great for me to speak to him as well. So certainly really proud of our efforts. Hopefully the fans and listeners have really enjoyed it. I'm sure they'll enjoy the one that we've got coming out before Christmas, and then we'll wait and see what the future holds.
Yeah, exactly. So finally, a massive thank you to Stuart Franklin and all the Gersnet podders as well, who help us, and Stuart edits all this and makes us sound good, basically. So it's a huge thank you to Stuart. It's a huge thank you also to our podcast sponsors, KJM Printing. You can find them online at KJM Printing. They have a shop in Dumfries as well. And they do all sorts. They make all sorts of things to do with football. They're affiliated with a couple of clubs, Derby, Hibs as well. They make Ranger stuff as well. So please go and check them out. And also to our friends at Custom Kitchen Factory, Ali and the boys over there. They do a fantastic job. I know they've fitted a few kitchens for some of our listeners and blog readers, and they're absolutely fantastic. And what they provide us is not monetary gain. We have raised over £14,000 for Rangers Youth Development Company, and there'll be more fundraising to come. And also nearly £1,000 for Rangers charities, and also £1,000 also for other Rangers supporters that have asked us for help for things. So what we do is any money that helps run the website and helps do these podcasts, and that's what we use the money for. We hope that you've enjoyed this. Obviously, it's been a different podcast. It's not one where we can sit and ask, what's your favourite goal and have a good time with that. I appreciate there's been a lot of information, and it is a very long podcast. So thank you for sticking with us. Please check out the website, 4LadsHadADream. You just stick that into Google and you'll find the website. Please subscribe and read the blogs. And tell us what you think. Come on to the website. It's my site. It's myself who does it. We have blog contributions from Rhiannon. She covers the women's stuff. Gary covers tactics. He comes on every now and then. And Mo Alexander staff is still heavily involved as well. And he blogs every now and then. And of course, myself and Chris. Couldn't really do the podcast without Chris as well. He's so valuable and a great input into it. So until next time, our 30th episode, it'll be a Christmas special with a certain Mr. Chris Boyd. So until next time, enjoy the nonsense, the irrelevant, and the noise. Thank you.